Welcome to the Friendly Podcast Guide, sorting through podcasts so you don't have to. I'm Andy Smiley, and I want to help you discover the right podcast without having to listen to an entire episode. Now, let's talk podcasts. Hi there, welcome back. This week's episode is a kids' science podcast with a super cool twist. It's called Nature Narratives, and Jonathan Byram is the host. He composes music for his day job, so he's able to make these epic musical scores to put with these episodes that explain the science of nature. Before we dive into my chat with Jonathan, here are some details about the show. The show description is, Nature Narratives is a science podcast for kids ages 8 to 14. Each episode describes one awe-inspiring natural phenomenon as a dramatic adventure story and features custom music score throughout. The length of each episode is about 5 minutes, and it is completely kid-ear friendly. The series is ongoing, with new episodes available when Jonathan puts together a new episode. So you can follow the show, and when a new episode comes out, you can be pleasantly surprised. Before we learn more about the vibe of the show, we're going to take a quick break to talk about the Friendly Podcast Recap. The Friendly Podcast Guide officially has a newsletter. How exciting is that? I'll drop into your emails once a month to give you a quick recap of the episodes that came out the previous month, along with all of the discount codes from my partners from those episodes, and some episodes from other podcasts that I loved in the past month that I think you'll like too. You can subscribe to my newsletter by going to my website, friendlypodcastguide.com. Now we get to hear from Jonathan about why he loves to compose the music for his episodes. I am so excited to have Jonathan Byram on the podcast today. His podcast is called Nature Narratives. And can you introduce yourself a little bit to us, Jonathan?
Yes. Hi, Andy. My name is Jonathan Byram, and I make Nature Narratives podcast. Thanks for having me on. I'm in Los Angeles. I live here with my wife and my 1.5-year-old, and my wife has helped me a lot with the podcast. But anyway, professionally, I'm a composer and a singer, and born and raised here in LA, and that's me.
I love that. That's so fun. I feel like most people that live in LA were not born there. So I feel like you have a one-up on them, for sure.
Yes, right. Yeah, I'm very proud of that. And whenever us LA natives find each other, it's always like, oh, you're from here too? Because it's always like, oh yeah, I moved here from Kansas to be an actor or whatever.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
Truly, I did live in Kansas for 3 years, and I do love Kansas. It is nothing like LA, though. So why did you start Nature Narratives?
About 5 years ago, I was living in Chicago, and I moved there to pursue a girl who I'm now married to. While I was living there, I had a view out of my window of the building's roof next to me, and on a snowy day, or it had snowed the day before, and I saw the snow melting, and then it became a damp roof, and then the damp roof started evaporating. The water started evaporating off of the damp roof, and it was this amazing image of swirling mist, and it was whipping in the Chicago wind, and I imagined it going all the way up into the atmosphere, and I thought, that is such a cool, wild adventure to be snow, 4 hours ago, and then to be water for a minute, and then vapor, and then the cycle starts over again. I was like transported back to elementary school science, but like with the awe and wonder of my adult self appreciating it. And so I just started writing the story out of this adventure of a water molecule. And that's how I started Nature Narratives.
That sounds fabulous. I truly believe that as an adult, I'm just so bummed that I wasn't more excited about school when I was in it, learning things for the first time.
Oh my gosh, totally.
I feel like I wish sometimes I could go back and be like, this is really cool. You should really enjoy this, 7-year-old Andy.
Yes, totally. I'm just blown away by how amazing nature and the world is. And I'm revisiting all these basic lessons that I probably didn't really care about that much when I was a kid, but I'm doing it now through this podcast. So it's I'm healing some sort of childhood experience through this podcast.
That's awesome. Yeah. I love it. So what do you want kids to get out? Well, kids and adults, I guess people in general, to get out of your podcast?
I want them to enjoy it. I want them to be. I want it to be very clear and easy to understand, so that you actually learn something. And I also want it to be. My tagline is always be amazed, because that's every episode comes out of something that I've noticed or come across, or that someone suggested, that I just find amazing. And the more I research it, the more amazed I am. So I hope that people get jazzed about, lightning and the Grand Canyon and the water cycle through it.
I absolutely love that. I really love. Will you talk a little bit more about the music behind it? Because I feel like that's such a fun and fascinating part of the podcast.
Well, thank you. That's I really appreciate that. That's what I do for a living, is compose music, and I'm working on a film score right now. So yeah, I guess probably, yeah, I had an ulterior motive for doing this podcast. It was so fun to score these little short stories any way I wanted, without a director telling me what their vision is, without, writing a song for somebody with somebody else in mind, and just like, yeah, it was just so fun to just kind of have free reign, and I would do them very, very quickly and just kind of intuitively and spontaneously. And anyway, yeah, the scoring, the music was a really, really fun part of this project.
Definitely. I feel like I listened to your episode about, I think it was solar flares. Now I can't remember exactly.
Cool. Yeah, that's the more recent.
Yes.
Couple.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. And holy cow, I feel like it just made it that much more epic. Like,
Cool.
It was fascinating to learn about, because I feel like, yeah, I probably learned about solar flares at one point, but like it made it almost like a movie, right? That I was able to like picture it in my mind with this awesome music behind it. I don't know. It just made it so much more fun. And I feel like that would really be compelling for, like a middle school, junior high science class to like listen to this introduction to whatever, solar flares, and then have the teacher dive in and be like, hey, so when you heard this part and you heard this word, this is what it meant and this is what it looks like. And I think that's such a fun, unique podcast idea. And I'm very intrigued by it.
That is great. Can I just quote all that on the website? That is
definitely. I give you my permission.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, that's definitely the goal, the target. My wife is a professional teacher, certified when she was in Chicago doing public school there. And then when we moved here to LA, she got certified in Montessori. So she's just like this uber qualified teacher. Anyway, so I would run all these scripts by her, and like she would help me shape them in a way that was like classroom relevant and useful, or to homeschoolers. Yeah, so she really helped rein things in. She was like my editor. It was really helpful.
That's awesome. So I feel like we've touched on it, but how would you describe the vibe of your show?
The vibe is it's kind of, yeah, I hope it's cinematic. That'd be a good word.
That is a good word.
Yeah, you helped me with that one a minute ago. and then mysterious for me comes to mind too, because I was discovering new things while I was making it, and then wonder.
Totally.
Yeah. So there's like some. It kind of depends on what the subject is. Like the lightning episode is actually kind of scary, anyway. So it kind of has a range.
Sure. So cinematic and wonder, I feel like, are two good descriptors of like the overall vibe of the show. And then there are different versions of that.
Yeah.
Depending on the episode.
Yeah. This has been really helpful for me, Andy. Just to talk this through with you.
Well, I talk to a lot of podcast hosts and I listen to a lot of podcasts. So I feel like
your consulting business is the next step.
It's starting right here. I love it. So this might be hard, but what is your favorite episode or couple of episodes that you've done?
I prepared for this one because you sent me that question ahead of time, and it's definitely the solar flare one.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, it is. It's like when I was learning about that. Oh, because it's not just the solar flare; it's the aurora.
Yes.
So it's a two-parter. It first talks about the solar flare, and then the second part is the, charged ions flying through space and then colliding with Earth's magnetic field, and that results in the aurora borealis, or the southern one, and the northern southern lights. So, it's just mind blowing, and that was just a really fun episode. Oh, and musically, in the first part, I got to do one of those. Like every time there's an explosion in space in a movie, it's always like a silence and then a huge boom. It's like whoop.
Totally.
I got to do one of those in that episode.
It has everything really then.
Yeah, it's got it all.
Awesome. Oh, I love that so much. Okay, I feel like this is obvious, but I like to ask for all of my mom listeners, is this podcast okay for little ears?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. There's definitely no cussing.
I would assume not when it's for children.
Yeah.
And okay, is there anything else that we didn't touch on yet that you want to mention?
You can go to my website to check out like all kinds of stuff that I do, and that's probably the easiest way to get a full picture of the podcast, unless you just want to go follow it, on the platform. JonathanByram.com. And there's a podcast, there's the nature narratives. There's like a tab for nature narratives on there.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
I will make sure to link your website and the solar flare and northern and southern lights episodes in the show notes so people can jump straight to them if they want to. And thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I'm really excited for my listeners to start listening to these with their kids or their classrooms or, wherever they want to listen. Yeah. And thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for doing it. This is probably such a huge service for people looking for, the right podcast.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want to hear about more podcasts from me, please follow or subscribe on your podcast app of choice. And just a reminder to subscribe to my newsletter, The Friendly Podcast Recap. Talk to you soon.